She stole that uniform. My father's voice cracked through the Franklin County Courthouse so loudly that every conversation stopped. A woman standing outside Courtroom 4 lowered her coffee. A deputy sheriff looked up from his paperwork. Even the judge paused before taking his seat. For one awful second, every pair of eyes landed on me. I stood there in my army dress uniform, trying to remember how to breathe. My name is Abigail Turner. I'm 46 years old, and I'd spent more than half my life serving my country. Yet that Tuesday morning in Columbus, Ohio, the hardest battle I'd ever faced wasn't overseas or on a military installation. It was 20 feet away, wearing a Navy sport coat, pointing a shaking finger at me. My own father. "I knew she'd fake something like this," Harold Turner shouted. "That uniform doesn't belong to her." The bailiff stepped closer. "Sir, you'll need to lower your voice." "I'll lower it when someone explains why she's pretending to be a soldier." I closed my eyes for just a moment. It wasn't the accusation that hurt anymore. It was how familiar it sounded. My attorney, Michael Evans, leaned toward me. "Don't react." "I wasn't planning to." "You looked like you were." "I was thinking about leaving." He gave me a sideways glance. "And letting him win." I didn't answer. Outside the courtroom windows, I could see downtown Columbus waking up. Morning traffic crawled along High Street. People hurried toward offices carrying briefcases and coffee cups, completely unaware that my entire life was about to be picked apart inside this old courthouse. It wasn't supposed to have come to this. 3 months earlier, I'd received certified papers while eating breakfast in my townhouse near Dublin. I thought it was another stack of retirement paperwork from the Department of Defense. Instead, it was a lawsuit. My father claimed I'd stolen family property, forged military records, and illegally claimed benefits reserved for veterans. He even wanted the farmhouse outside Circleville where I'd grown up. The same farmhouse I'd left when I was 18 because staying there had become impossible. Back then, joining the Army had felt like choosing oxygen over suffocation. Dad never forgave me. He'd served one tour in Vietnam. He believed soldiers fought with rifles. He couldn't understand intelligence work. If people couldn't see you kicking down doors on television, then in his mind you weren't doing anything important. For years, every phone call ended the same way. "You've got a desk job." "No, Dad." "Then explain what you actually do." "I can't." Convenient. Eventually, we stopped calling altogether. After Mom died from pancreatic cancer 8 years ago, the silence became permanent. Sometimes silence feels peaceful. Sometimes it feels like concrete. Mine was the second kind. The courtroom slowly filled. A reporter from the Columbus Dispatch sat in the second row. Another local television crew whispered near the back wall. Apparently, my father had convinced several people this was a stolen military honors case. Just perfect. Michael organized our files with calm, practiced movements. "You sleep at all?" "About 2 hours." "You eat?" "I had half a blueberry muffin from Tim Hortons." He smiled. "That's not breakfast." "It's what happened." He slid a bottle of water across the table. "You're going to need it." Across the room, my younger brother Daniel wouldn't even look at me. He stared at his phone like the most important thing in his life was happening somewhere else. That bothered me more than Dad yelling. Daniel and I used to fish together at Deer Creek Lake. He cried when I left for basic training. He promised he'd write. The letters stopped after 6 months. Later, the excuses started. Life got busy. Work. Kids. Maybe next Christmas. Maybe next summer. Eventually, maybe became never. Now he sat beside our father as though we'd never shared a childhood at all. The judge entered. Everyone stood. After routine introductions, Harold's attorney wasted no time. "Your Honor, this case concerns fraud, theft, and false representation." My stomach tightened. He displayed photographs on a courtroom monitor. Pictures of me in uniform. Receiving medals. Standing beside senior officers. Leaving government buildings. "This woman," he said, pointing toward me, "has built her life on deception." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because if I didn't laugh, I thought I might cry. The judge turned toward me. "Ms. Turner, were you employed by the Department of Defense?" "Yes, Your Honor." "In what capacity?" "I'm sorry, sir." "You cannot answer." "I can answer generally." "Please do." "I served as an Army intelligence officer before transitioning into civilian defense work." My father's chair scraped loudly across the floor. "That's a lie." The judge frowned. "Mr. Turner, I know my own daughter." "No," I whispered before I realized I'd spoken aloud. The room became quiet again. "I don't think you do." Dad looked at me with the same disappointment I'd seen since I was 18. "You always wanted attention. I wanted respect. You wanted to wear a uniform you didn't earn. Michael finally stood. Your Honor, my client possesses documentation verifying every stage of her military career. Harold snorted. Probably forged. The judge held up one hand. We'll review all evidence in due course. For the next 30 minutes, both attorneys argued over documents, property records, and military service files. Everything felt strangely ordinary. Painfully ordinary. Paper. Pens. Legal language. The slow ticking of the courtroom clock. Then something changed. The rear doors opened. A uniformed military courier stepped inside carrying a sealed envelope. He walked directly toward the bench. Every conversation stopped. He handed the envelope to the bailiff. I have an urgent delivery for the court. The envelope bore the seal of the Department of Defense. Across the front, stamped in bold red letters, was one word. Urgent. The judge looked surprised. So ordered? Yes, Your Honor. He carefully broke the seal. Michael looked at me. I looked back, just as confused. I hadn't requested anything from Washington. Neither of us knew what was inside. The judge read the first page. His expression changed instantly. Color drained from his face. Without saying a word, he reached up, removed his glasses, and slowly stood from the bench. The courtroom fell completely silent. No one spoke. The judge remained standing behind the bench, his eyes fixed on the single sheet of paper in his hands. It wasn't a long document. From where I sat, it looked like one page, maybe two. Whatever he had read had wiped away the confidence he'd shown only moments earlier. He looked toward the bailiff. Please close the courtroom doors. The heavy wooden doors swung shut. The reporters exchanged puzzled looks. One television cameraman lowered his camera without being asked. My father folded his arms. What is this supposed to be? He muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Another one of Abigail's tricks. I honestly wished I knew. Michael leaned closer to me. You expecting something from Washington? I shook my head. If I were, I'd probably be the last person they'd tell. He gave a faint smile. That actually sounds believable. The judge cleared his throat. I have received official correspondence from the Department of Defense requesting that this court temporarily suspend open proceedings pending verification of certain matters. Dad laughed. Actually laughed. Oh, come on. His attorney gently tugged on his sleeve. Harold, no, this is ridiculous. She couldn't fool me growing up and she's not fooling me now. The judge ignored him. Bailiff. Yes, Your Honor. Please escort the media into the hallway until I determine how we should proceed. One reporter stood immediately. Your Honor, we're members of the press. I understand. May we ask? No. His tone ended the conversation. Within 2 minutes, the reporters were outside still talking among themselves through the glass doors. The courtroom suddenly felt smaller, quieter, more personal. I looked across the room at Daniel. For the first time that morning, he looked nervous. Not confused. Nervous. He kept bouncing his right knee beneath the table, something he'd done since we were kids whenever he was hiding something. Mom used to tease him about it. You've got a guilty knee, she'd laugh. The memory hit me so unexpectedly that I almost smiled. I hadn't thought about that in years. The courtroom doors opened again. 2 people entered. One wore an Army service uniform with the insignia of a colonel. The other was a woman in a dark navy business suit carrying a slim leather briefcase. Neither looked dramatic. Neither looked intimidating. They simply looked like professionals who had somewhere important to be. The colonel walked toward the bench. He handed over an identification folder. The judge examined it carefully before nodding. Thank you, Colonel. Dad leaned forward. I'd like to know who these people are. The woman answered before anyone else could. My name is Laura McKenna. I'm legal counsel for the Department of Defense. She spoke calmly, almost casually. We're here because this civil lawsuit unintentionally involves information connected to classified federal employment records. Dad snorted. There it is. Laura didn't even look at him. The government is not taking a position regarding ownership of the Turner family property. She opened her briefcase. Our concern is the inaccurate allegations involving Ms. Turner's military service. My father slapped his hand against the table. I know my own daughter. The colonel finally turned toward him. With respect, sir. His voice remained polite. You know your daughter as your daughter. He paused. You do not know every assignment she received. The room became so quiet I could hear the courthouse air conditioner humming overhead. I looked down at my folded hands. For 24 years I'd signed papers promising never to discuss certain parts of my work, not even with family, especially not with family. That promise had cost me birthdays. Christmas dinners, friendships, even my marriage. People don't always understand silence. Sometimes they mistake it for dishonesty. Sometimes they assume you're hiding shame instead of protecting responsibility. The judge adjusted his glasses. Counselor McKenna, how much of this court file may remain public? She consulted another document. The employment verification may be discussed generally. And the remainder? Protected. Dad threw both hands into the air. Protected from who? Laura finally faced him. From everyone. He laughed again. That's convenient. Michael spoke for the first time in several minutes. Your Honor, may my client answer a question? The judge nodded. I stood. My knees felt steadier than I expected. Sir, I said quietly, looking toward the bench, I've never asked anyone to keep secrets for my benefit. I swallowed. I simply kept promises I made when I accepted certain assignments. Dad rolled his eyes. Listen to this. I continued anyway. I understand why people think intelligence work sounds mysterious. A few people smiled. The truth is, most of it involved paperwork. Even the colonel chuckled. I spent years reading contracts, reviewing procurement reports, interviewing engineers, and helping investigators determine where government equipment actually went. I looked toward my father. It wasn't glamorous. He stared back without speaking. But it mattered. The judge turned several pages. I see documentation confirming military service dates. Yes, Your Honor. I also see commendations. Yes. Most are heavily redacted. They would be. Dad slammed both palms on the table. This is unbelievable. The judge looked up sharply. Mr. Turner, one more interruption and I'll hold you in contempt. That finally quieted him. Only for a moment. While everyone reviewed documents, I noticed Daniel quietly reach into his jacket pocket. He checked his phone beneath the table. His face changed. Not fear. Panic. He quickly locked the screen. Too quickly. Michael noticed it too. He leaned close enough that only I could hear him. Did you see that? I did. He wasn't reading a message. What do you mean? He was checking whether someone else had sent one. I frowned. I don't follow. Michael glanced toward Daniel. I hired an investigator 2 weeks ago. You never told me. I wanted facts first. He slid a thin manila envelope beneath a stack of legal papers. Don't open it yet. What is it? I think this lawsuit has very little to do with your father. I stared at him. What are you saying? He lowered his voice another notch. I think your brother needed money. My heartbeat quickened. No, Michael didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked directly across the courtroom at Daniel. After today, he whispered, I don't think he'll be able to hide it anymore. I looked down at the unopened envelope resting beneath my hand. Across the front were 6 simple words written in black marker. Financial investigation, Daniel Turner. For the first time since walking into that courthouse, I realized the case wasn't unfolding the way anyone expected, least of all me. When court recessed for lunch, I didn't feel hungry. Michael suggested grabbing something at the cafe across the street from the courthouse, but I settled for a black coffee and a bottle of water. We found a small table by the front window of a corner diner where office workers were ordering burgers and soup, like it was any other Tuesday. Outside, people hurried along South High Street without giving the courthouse a second glance. I envied them. You should eat something, Michael said, pushing a basket of fries toward me. I don't think my stomach remembers how. It'll remember eventually. I picked up one fry mostly to make him stop asking. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. The waitress refilled our coffee without interrupting. Somewhere near the kitchen, an old country song played softly through worn speakers. Michael finally slid the manila envelope across the table. I've gone over every page twice. You already know what's inside. I do. And you're making me open it anyway. I think you need to see it with your own eyes. I stared at the envelope for several seconds before breaking the seal. The first page was a property report. The second showed bank records. The third listed several loans. Every page had one name in common. Daniel Turner. I frowned. These loan amounts, they're real. Over $300,000? Michael nodded. Spread over almost 6 years. I kept reading. There were refinancing documents on my father's farm. Credit cards. Personal loans. Missed payments. Late fees. Then something caught my attention. Dad's signature? What about it? It doesn't look right. It isn't. I looked up. You had it examined, a forensic document examiner. And he believes at least 4 signatures were traced. I sat back in my chair. No, Michael didn't interrupt. He forged Dad's name. That's the opinion of the expert. I looked back down. The room suddenly felt warmer. Growing up, Daniel had always been charming. Teachers loved him. Neighbors trusted him. Even when he got into trouble, someone else somehow ended up taking the blame. Usually me. I hadn't thought about elementary school in decades, but memories started surfacing one after another. Daniel broke a neighbor's mailbox with his bicycle. Dad grounded me because I'd failed to watch him. Daniel skipped school during his senior year. Dad accused me of being a bad influence, even though I'd already been stationed at Fort Huachuca in Arizona for nearly 2 years. Back then, I'd argued. Eventually, I stopped. Some battles cost more than they were worth. Michael quietly waited while I continued reading. The investigator had built a timeline. 5 years earlier, Daniel's construction business had started losing money. Instead of telling anyone he'd borrowed more, then more. Eventually, gambling entered the picture. Sports betting, casino trips, online poker. Small losses became larger ones. By the time creditors began calling, he was desperate. Why didn't Dad notice? Michael sighed. Because your father trusted him, and never trusted me. I wasn't going to say it. You didn't have to. The waitress returned. You folks doing okay? Michael smiled politely. We're fine. She looked at my untouched fries. Honey, those are getting cold. I managed a small smile. I think they've accepted their fate. She laughed. That's the saddest thing I've heard all day. After she walked away, Michael leaned forward. There's something else. I was afraid you'd say that. The investigator interviewed a former employee. I rubbed my forehead. What now? He claims Daniel regularly complained that your father would believe anything as long as your name was attached to it. I closed the folder. I don't want to hear the exact words. You sure? I'm sure. The truth already hurt enough. Court resumed at 1:30. The reporters had returned. Word about the Pentagon representatives had apparently spread because more spectators filled the gallery than before lunch. As I walked back to the defense table, I noticed people looking at me differently. Not with admiration, with curiosity. That felt easier to carry than suspicion. The judge called the session back to order. Michael stood first. Your Honor, we'd like permission to introduce newly discovered financial evidence relevant to the plaintiff's motives. Dad looked confused. My motives? Michael remained calm. We believe this lawsuit was encouraged by someone with significant financial interests. Daniel shifted in his chair. Only slightly. But I noticed. So did the judge. Harold frowned. What are you talking about? Michael handed several folders to the clerk. We have evidence that substantial debts were accumulated using property connected to the Turner family. Dad slowly turned toward Daniel. His expression wasn't angry, just puzzled. Son! Daniel cleared his throat. This has nothing to do with me. Michael spoke carefully. Mr. Turner, no one mentioned your name. Daniel froze. The courtroom grew very still. It was a tiny mistake. The kind people make when they already know where a conversation is headed. Dad looked from Daniel to me, then back again. I don't understand. I know, I thought. Neither did I. Not completely. Michael called the forensic document examiner to the witness stand. She explained her qualifications. 22 years examining signatures for state and federal investigations. No drama, just facts. She projected enlarged copies of several documents onto a courtroom screen. One showed Dad's authentic signature. The other showed the signature on a refinancing agreement. She pointed out differences in pressure spacing and letter formation. The signatures are inconsistent with natural handwriting. Dad leaned forward. What does that mean? It means, she answered gently, someone likely attempted to reproduce your signature. He blinked. No, she didn't argue. Experts rarely do. They simply present evidence. Daniel suddenly stood. This is ridiculous. His attorney grabbed his sleeve. Sit down. They're making this look like... Sit. He sat. Barely. Michael requested permission to introduce bank records next. The judge approved. One transfer after another appeared on the courtroom monitor. Loan proceeds, credit advances, mortgage payments, casino withdrawals, sports betting deposits. Even I hadn't realized how extensive everything was. Dad stared at the screen as if he were trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Then he quietly asked the question that broke my heart. Daniel! My brother wouldn't meet his eyes. Did you know about these loans? Silence. Dad asked again. Son, Daniel swallowed. They're complicated. Dad looked genuinely lost. You told me business was good. It usually was. You said the farm wasn't being used as collateral. His voice disappeared. For the first time that day, my father didn't look angry. He looked old, older than his 74 years. The confidence he'd carried into court that morning seemed to drain away with every unanswered question. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt tired. Really tired. Because revenge had always sounded satisfying in my imagination. The reality looked like an aging father realizing he might have trusted the wrong child. There wasn't much joy in watching that happen. The judge reviewed the latest exhibits before speaking. Given the significance of this new evidence, the court will reconvene tomorrow morning. His gavel struck once. As everyone stood, a deputy hurried toward the judge with a folded note. The judge read it, frowned, and looked across the courtroom. Mr. Daniel Turner. Daniel stopped walking. Before you leave this building, you should know the court has just been informed that you may be the subject of a separate criminal investigation. My brother's face turned completely white. I barely slept that night. Back in my townhouse in Dublin, I made myself a grilled cheese sandwich around 9 o'clock because I realized I'd gone nearly the whole day without eating. I left half of it on the plate. The television was on, but I wasn't watching it. Every local station seemed to have found the story. A civil lawsuit. A retired Army intelligence officer. Pentagon officials. Possible financial fraud. The reporters didn't have many facts yet, so they filled the gaps with speculation. I muted the television. For 20 years, I'd worked in a world where speculation could ruin careers. Old habits die hard. Around 10:30, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Michael. Be at the courthouse by 8 o'clock. We have new witnesses. That was all it said. I stared at the message for a while before setting the phone down. I wasn't afraid of what might happen anymore. I was afraid of what it would cost. The next morning was humid even by late June standards. I stopped at a small coffee shop near the courthouse and ordered a medium black coffee. The young barista smiled. A big day. I laughed quietly. You have no idea. She handed me my cup. Well, whatever it is, I hope it goes your way. It was such a simple thing to say. Yet somehow it mattered. By the time I reached courtroom 4, the hallway was packed. More reporters. More cameras. More curious faces. A deputy recognized me and quietly opened a side door. Morning, Ms. Turner. Morning. He hesitated. My wife saw the news. I looked up. She wanted me to tell you. He smiled awkwardly. She hopes people quit judging before they know the whole story. I felt something loosen inside me. Tell her thank you. I will. Inside the courtroom, my father looked different. His shoulders sagged. His eyes were bloodshot. He hadn't shaved. For the first time in years, he looked less like the stubborn man who had raised me, and more like an exhausted widower trying to understand how his life had slipped away. Daniel wasn't there. His attorney was. But Daniel's chair sat empty. The judge entered. We are back on the record. Daniel's attorney stood immediately. Your Honor, my client has arrived. The courtroom doors opened. 2 sheriff's deputies escorted Daniel inside. He wasn't handcuffed. But he wasn't smiling either. He looked like someone who hadn't slept at all. Dad turned toward him. Where were you? Daniel avoided his eyes. Talking to investigators. The silence between them hurt more than any shouting match ever could. Michael called the first witness, a senior investigator from the county prosecutor's financial crimes unit. He explained how his office became involved after reviewing documents submitted during discovery. This investigation is ongoing, he said carefully, but we've verified multiple irregular financial transactions connected to Mr. Daniel Turner. Michael displayed a timeline on the courtroom monitor. The dates stretched back almost 7 years. Every time Daniel's business lost money, another loan appeared. Another transfer, another forged document, another withdrawal. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Dad stared at the screen. No. He whispered it more to himself than anyone else. No, that's not possible. Then came the witness I wasn't expecting. A middle-aged man named Steve Rollins. He had worked with Daniel for almost 8 years. Steve looked uncomfortable sitting in the witness chair. I don't like being here. Michael nodded. I understand. But you're under oath. I know. He took a deep breath. Daniel used to complain all the time. What about money? And Steve shifted in his seat. He'd say, Steve glanced toward my father before continuing. He'd say Harold would believe anything if Abby's name came up. The courtroom fell silent. Steve swallowed. He said blaming Abigail was easier than explaining where the money went. I looked down at my hands. Even though Michael had warned me, hearing those words spoken out loud still felt like someone had punched me in the chest. Dad slowly turned toward Daniel. Tell me that isn't true. Daniel said nothing. his attorney whispered urgently. Daniel remained silent. Dad tried again. Look at me. Finally, Daniel raised his head. His eyes filled with tears. I got in over my head. Dad blinked. What? I thought I could fix it. You said Abby stole from us. I needed someone you'd believe. The words seemed to echo around the room. I watched my father's face collapse. Not dramatically, quietly. Like an old house finally giving way after years of hidden damage. The judge called for a short recess. Nobody moved. Nobody needed one. The truth had already changed everything. When court resumed, Laura McKenna from the Department of Defense returned to the witness stand. She carried a single folder. Your Honor, with permission from the appropriate federal authorities, I am authorized to make a limited statement. The judge nodded. Proceed. She turned toward the courtroom. Ms. Abigail Turner served honorably in the United States Army. She paused. Every uniform she has worn. Another pause. Was earned. Every ribbon. Every badge. Every documented assignment available for public release has been verified. No classified details. No dramatic speeches. Just facts. Then she closed the folder. That is all. The room stayed quiet. Some truths don't need decoration. The judge looked toward my father. Mr. Turner. Dad slowly stood. His voice barely carried across the courtroom. I was wrong. No one interrupted. He turned toward me. I thought... His words caught. I thought I was protecting this family. He looked at Daniel. I never imagined, another long silence, that I was protecting the wrong person. I didn't know what to say. For years I'd imagined hearing an apology. I thought it would feel like winning. Instead, it felt like standing in the middle of the ruins after a storm. Being right didn't give me back birthdays, or Christmas mornings, or the last conversation I'd had with Mom before she died. Some things simply can't be recovered. The judge reviewed the remaining motions before speaking. Based on the evidence presented, this court dismisses all allegations concerning Ms. Turner's military service. His gavel came down. Furthermore, evidence relating to potential financial fraud is referred to the appropriate authorities. Reporters rushed toward the hallway as soon as court adjourned. Everyone wanted the same story. The decorated daughter. The disgraced son. The father who believed the wrong child. But as I gathered my papers, none of those headlines mattered anymore. Dad slowly walked toward me. He stopped only a few feet away. His voice was barely above a whisper. Abby, it was the first time he'd called me that in almost 15 years. I don't expect you to forgive me. I looked at him for a long moment. I don't know if I can today. He nodded. I understand. Then he quietly walked away, for the first time in my life. He looked completely alone. 3 months after the lawsuit ended, life looked ordinary again. And I was grateful for that. For nearly 25 years, my work had revolved around emergencies, deadlines, investigations, and problems nobody wanted to claim. Somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten how comforting an ordinary Tuesday could be. I went back to simple routines. Saturday mornings started at the farmer's market in Dublin. I bought sweet corn from the same couple every week. Wednesday afternoons, I volunteered with a Veterans Resource Center in Columbus, helping former service members navigate retirement paperwork and disability forms. It wasn't glamorous, but neither was most of the work I'd ever loved. People often thanked me. I usually told them they would have figured it out without me. Most smiled anyway. One afternoon, while organizing old files in my home office, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I hadn't seen in years. Circleville Assisted Living. I stared at it until voicemail picked up. A few minutes later, another call came. This time I answered. Hello, a gentle woman's voice introduced herself. Ms. Turner, my name is Linda. I'm the activities director here at Maple Grove Assisted Living. Yes. I'm calling because your father asked if we'd contact you. I closed my eyes. Is he all right? He's physically fine. She hesitated. He just talks about you a lot. That wasn't the answer I expected. I see. There's no pressure. He simply wanted you to know he'd like to see you if you're willing. After we hung up, I spent nearly an hour walking around my neighborhood without deciding anything. Old habits returned whenever I felt overwhelmed. Walking helped. By the time I reached the little park near the Scioto River, I'd already talked myself into visiting him. And out of it, at least 6 different times. Michael called that evening. So what? You're terrible at pretending nothing's on your mind. I laughed. My father wants to see me. What do you want? I honestly don't know. You don't owe him anything. I know. But owing someone and wanting peace aren't the same thing. There was a long pause. "I think," Michael finally said, "you're trying to figure out whether visiting him would be for him or for me." Exactly. The following Sunday I drove to Circleville. The highway felt familiar. I'd traveled those roads hundreds of times growing up, usually with Mom beside me pointing out old barns she'd known since childhood. The farmhouse was only a few miles away. I didn't turn in. Some memories needed a little more time. Maple Grove wasn't fancy. It smelled faintly of coffee and lemon furniture polish. Residents gathered in the common room watching a Cincinnati Reds game. A volunteer was passing around homemade cookies. Dad sat near the window reading yesterday's newspaper. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not weaker, just smaller. When he looked up and saw me, he removed his reading glasses so quickly they almost slipped from his hand. "You came." I said I might. He smiled. "You always did keep people honest." I pulled out the chair across from him. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "I've practiced this conversation." "Oh, about 100 times. Did any version go well?" He chuckled softly. "Not really. That surprised both of us. It was the first genuine laugh we'd shared since I was a teenager. "I've had a lot of time to think," he said. "I imagine you have." I kept asking myself how I got it so wrong. I didn't answer. He wasn't asking me. He was asking himself. After another long silence, he quietly said, "Your mother used to tell me I confused trust with comfort." I looked up. I never understood what she meant. And now, I believed the child who made life easier. His eyes filled with regret. I questioned the one who challenged my assumptions. For years, I'd imagined telling him everything he'd done wrong. Instead, I found myself asking a different question. "Why didn't you ever ask me, what?" "When you thought my job sounded strange." He looked embarrassed. "I figured if you wanted me to know you'd tell me." I couldn't. "I know that now." "You never asked why I joined the Army." He nodded slowly. "I assumed you were trying to get away from me." "I was trying to become someone I could respect." He looked down at his hands. "I wish I'd known." "So do I." He reached into the pocket of his cardigan and pulled out a small envelope. "I found this while cleaning out the house." He handed it to me. Inside was a faded birthday card. The date on the front stopped me cold. It was from my 22nd birthday. I'd never received it. Mom's handwriting filled the inside. "No matter where the Army sends you, remember there's nothing you could ever do that would make me less proud of you. Love, Mom." I read it twice before I could speak. "Dad!" I found a box of letters. He looked ashamed. "Your mother wrote to you all the time." "I know. I never mailed several of them." I closed my eyes. The old anger stirred for just a second, then disappeared. Because the man sitting across from me wasn't the same stubborn father who'd hidden those letters decades earlier. Time had already punished him more thoroughly than I ever could. "I can't change that," he whispered. "No, I'm sorry. It wasn't dramatic. There were no speeches, no tears running down anyone's face, just two people finally telling each other the truth." I reached across the table and rested my hand on his. "I forgive you." He looked at me carefully. "You mean that?" "I do." "Why?" I smiled. "Because carrying this anger has been exhausting." That November, Columbus held its annual Veterans Day ceremony. The morning air was crisp enough for a heavy coat. Volunteers placed small American flags along the walkway while a high school band warmed up nearby. For the first time in years, I wore my Army dress uniform without hesitation. Not to prove anything, not to answer accusations. Simply because it represented a chapter of my life I was finally ready to embrace again. Several veterans stopped to shake my hand. One Marine smiled. "Ma'am, thank you for your service." I smiled back. "Thank you for yours." As the ceremony began, I caught sight of my father sitting quietly in the second row beside a staff member from Maple Grove. He didn't wave. Neither did I. We simply smiled. Sometimes that's enough. Looking back now, I realize revenge isn't always about watching someone lose. Sometimes it's about refusing to let someone else's mistakes decide who you become. The courtroom gave me my name back, but forgiveness gave me my peace. If this story reminded you of someone who's been misunderstood, or someone you've been meaning to forgive, I hope you'll carry that thought with you today. And if stories like this speak to your heart, I'd be honored if you joined me again for another journey.